Good afternoon and welcome to AP European History with Mr. Bobby. We are going to continue talking about Chapter 27, the Great War. Today we'll be talking about Section 2, the Home Front. And as always, we'll be using the McKay, Hill, and Buckler text, 7th edition. Just a couple things of note. If you're listening to this essay tonight and you're not in school today, this lecture, excuse me, there are answer keys for the pretest and for the Chapter 27 Quiz 1 and Chapter 27 Quiz 2 on my webpage. You can take a look at those. There are also some key terms and some guiding questions on a digital review sheet that are also in the Chapter 27 folder. So keep all those things in mind as we move forward. Periodically throughout this small lecture, I may hit on some questions that are going to be on your test, and away we go. The home front. The home front in Germany. Total war is something that's brought up a lot and talked about, and I've hit on it in quizzes, and we'll be hitting on it now, is the idea of government focusing all of its efforts on war production and government-planned economies. Even in economies that have been more democratic or capitalistic, during the war, people found it a necessity to, the government found it a necessity to take back more control. This involved rationing of goods and food, price and wage controls, and restrictions on workers' freedom of movement. One of the key guys that is talked about is Walter Rathenau. He's a Jewish industrialist, and he's in charge of Germany's largest electrical plant. Okay, that's a key name for you. The War Raw Materials Board in Germany. They were created to ration and distribute all raw materials, everything from oil to manure to fruit peels to hair, everything. And they needed to do this because they were at a disadvantage compared to Great Britain. They also came up with synthetic rubber and synthetic nitrogen, and that's a key for you because without that synthetic nitrogen, which they're going through, they had planned on using approximately 12 bombs a day. And they were ending up using, obviously, much, much more. They were in the war a lot longer than they expected. And if they had not done this, the war would have ended very quickly for Germany. So some positives, if you want to look at it that way, of total war forcing countries like Germany to become more ingenuitive. Food was rationed according to physical need. In the last 2 years, only expectant mothers and children received milk rations. And the physical need meant that you were given a certain allotment of caloric intake a day based on the type of job that you had. So everything was controlled down to the minute detail. There are massive economic problems that are going to arise out of this. Massive deficit spending, inflation, black market, and a lot of class conflict that go on in Germany that don't hit other countries quite as hard. The military rulers are mentioned in your text, and they become the real rulers of Germany during this period in time. Hindenburg and Ludendorff are the gentlemen that are discussed. Okay, hints for your test. The Schlieffen Plan is something that'll definitely be hit on in your test. Diplomacy of Otto von Bismarck, the establishment of trench warfare. And let's see what else. Rosa Luxemburg is also somebody that'll be hit on your test, and it'll be mentioned later. Auxiliary service law. All males 17 to 60 only work jobs critical to the war effort. Women and children also in forced labor situations. Many starve to death, living on less than 1,000 calories a day. This is history's first totalitarian society, completely controlled from top to bottom by the government. Great Britain, in contrast, has and follows along in the footsteps of total war. Their Ministry of Musicians, David Lloyd George, he'll later become a very influential prime minister in 1916. They organized private industry, controlled profits, allocated labor, fixed wage rates, settled labor disputes. However, George did not like wasting the people's budget on war, and this is something that differed from Germany. Great Britain mobilized total war less rapidly because they had the support of the U.S. and they were still had the access and the seaways to import more goods from the U.S. And they had a much more vast network of empires around the world, whereas Germany was closed off, especially due to some of the submarine warfare restrictions that were going on. The social impact of war. Labor unions. Labor unions found greater prestige because they worked very closely with the government very early on, and they were able to build up some positives with the governments, and this allowed governments in the end to kind of pay them back by making labor unions more successful. They were very cooperative, and they were invited into policy making because they had such an influence with the people. Women were much more visible in the workforce. Many countries, they gained suffrage and a greater autonomy and independence. And in equality, your text talks a lot about the closing gap between rich and poor, and this is a closing mental gap and a closing economic gap. The jobs were much more high paying, closing it there, and there was equality in the fact that everyone suffered during the war. Okay, wealthy people lost sons and daughters, poor people lost sons and daughters. There was much strife. Anything that happened in war to someone was not based on socioeconomic status, and this brought people a little bit closer together and to gain a little bit more understanding of the things that they went through. Political tensions. We see a lot of countries that suffered some political tensions. First and foremost, Ireland, April 1916, the Easter Rebellion against the British. They saw this as an opportunity while Britain was occupied to revolt. France, facing a lot of war weariness and defeatism and a refusal to fight. Their Prime Minister, Clemenceau, creates a virtual dictatorship in 1917. In Austria and Hungary, leadership is destroyed. The empire is really breaking apart, and we see this most evidently in Yugoslavia and Czechoslovakia. In Italy, there are troops that mutinied. And in Germany, Karl Liebknecht, who is a radical socialist, believes in taking down the government and down with war. And this is where divisions of social conflict reemerge. This is what allows eventually a young Adolf Hitler into the fray. And really, when we look at things in chapters 28 and 29, as we lead up to World War II, we're going to find a lot of internal conflicts that happened before the war was even over in Germany that are going to impact the status of Germany. Okay, a couple of things before we end this. Make sure that you know a little bit about Clemenceau and his objectives, especially at the Paris Peace Conference. And settlements in the Treaty of Versailles.